are we? Well, there we are. I'm Max Kellerman. Welcome to This Just In, a fast hour around the world of sports and how I see it. And we start with Kyrie drama. We are 1 week away from the deadline for Kyrie to make a decision on his player option for next season. Woj reported today that the Nets want Kyrie on a shorter deal, but also added their teams rooting for Kyrie to opt out and walk away from the Nets, believing it would give them a chance to cobble together trade packages to acquire KD? I think we mean Kyrie. Brian Windhorst and JJ Redick with me now. Windy, let me start with you. What is Kyrie's leverage in this situation?
His leverage is not really with any other teams because the teams that would be interested in Kyrie don't have cap space. The teams that Kyrie would be interested in would have a hard time signing and trading for him. So his leverage is really that Kevin Durant and their partnership. So if Kyrie were to, I mean, really what it comes down to is, does he really have it within him to opt out of this contract, to leave a $36 million guarantee on the table? Because until he does that by next Wednesday, I don't think the Nets credibly believe that he would actually walk on them. And I think until Kevin Durant, potentially steps in, I'm not sure the Nets credibly believe Kyrie won't opt in and potentially sign a contract that they want. So I know that this is a very interesting and potentially heating up situation, but I believe when all of the cards fall, that this is going to end up with Kyrie back with the Nets on some extension that's not a 4-year extension that's totally guaranteed, that has some protection for Kyrie on salary and some protection on the Nets for everything else going forward.
Okay, now this is the nature of This Just In. Sometimes stuff breaks while we're on the air, sometimes literally while I'm walking from my office where I've edited all the scripts to sitting down here, which is what just happened here, JJ. So I said off the top of the show that teams believe that they would have a shot at KD, because that's what I read in prompter. I'm asking the producers now, did we mean Kyrie there? We did mean KD. I'm learning this in real time, too.
JJ. The idea that Woj reported is that if Kyrie were to opt out and not get his extension,
then KD might be available.
KD would essentially be asking for a trade.
But because I asked Bobby Marks on the radio on KJM this morning about that. Like, if you're the Nets, why? Because Bobby Marks was saying, a former executive with the Nets who's here at ESPN, he was saying, yeah, I would also just guarantee the first 2 years with Kyrie, and he'd have to play 80% of the games in order to have the next 2 years vest. And my question is, why play games if in the end you will cave to KD if he stands up for his guy, right? If that's the winning hand, why play games?
I mean, this is the leverage that Kevin Durant and Kyrie have right now, because if you go back to basically this rebuild to the point where they got them, they one of the worst trades in NBA history to the Boston Celtics. It didn't pan out with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Jason Terry. They gave up all these draft picks. They had a slow rebuild. They were bad for a few years. They end up getting these guys in free agency. They've traded away their depth and their young players, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, D'Angelo Russell. You go down the list, right? All these guys that helped build the culture. If Kyrie and KD were to leave, right, where do you go from there? You're essentially starting over, and that's the leverage that those two guys have right now.
Naturally, which is why if you're the Nets front office, if you're not going to do that, why are you nickel and diming or negotiating with Kyrie if they hold the leverage of KD saying you're going to have to do this or say goodbye to me? Why play games?
Well, I think the question goes back to the original signing. The original signing was this is coming off Kyrie and that second year in Boston where there were some issues there. And it's like we're willing to sign Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. We know they're a package deal, and KD is worth it. It goes back to that. That's why they have leverage, right? Because they want to play together.
Windy, what signal do you think Kyrie is sending to the league if he opts out of his contract a week from today?
Well, as far as going to another team, the classic leverage would be, if you don't pay me this salary, I will go to another team. And that might work in other situations, but Kyrie doesn't really have another team to go to. The only real threat that he has as far as leaving would be to leave the $36 million on the table and take a vast pay cut to go play for the Knicks, to go play for the Lakers, to go play for the Clippers. The only way to do that would be to sign for a mid-level exception, unless we all of a sudden start to see those teams peeling off cap space. If the Knicks in the next 72 hours start trading players off to open up cap space, that would change the leverage position. But that's not what the Knicks are signaling right now. So if Kyrie is opting out and he shows up in Los Angeles on July 1st, arm in arm with LeBron James in a strategically staged photo, that's a leverage play that he'd be willing to leave $30 million on the table. But that's not really good reality, because people aren't going to leave $30 million on the table. What JJ is describing is reality, that Kevin Durant, despite having 4 years on his contract, would show it would have an issue with it, and their partnership would ultimately force the Nets coming back to the table.
Yeah, again, I asked Bobby Marks that same question, because he said he would do kind of some version of what the Nets, but in the end, would you buckle if KD said it's my way or the highway? He said yes. So why bother going down that road? JJ, what should Kyrie do in your opinion?
I think the best scenario for him is to end up back in Brooklyn. They get Joe Harris healthy. They get Ben Simmons healthy. He's playing with an all-timer in Kevin Durant. They have a chance to win the East next year, be a championship contender. It'd be interesting, of course. They still have some holes in their roster. You know, I agree with Wendy on this. I think eventually Kyrie ends up playing for the Nets next season. I don't know how we get there. In this league, there's posturing, there's smoke and mirrors. The agents do it, the players do it, the teams do it. I feel like this is a lot of that right now.
Yeah, let me make a prediction right now. Kyrie is getting a fully guaranteed maximum contract. And if that's the case, I don't know what this is all about, right? Like, you're not.
It's all about getting to that. That's what it's all about.
If you think the other side has the nuclear option and you are not willing to go there, they win. Just avoid this whole thing. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he won't get it. This just inadvisable. 5 years ago today, the Sixers drafted Markelle.
Options. The deadline 1 week away, June 29th. Kyrie, seven-time All-Star, making the decision to stay in Brooklyn, exercise his player option, or become a free agent. It's a $36.9 million player option for next season, which will be his 12th NBA season. So, will he or won't he? Hello to senior NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. And Woj, until we get word from Camp Kyrie, we depend on people like you to tell us what you're hearing about the direction in which Kyrie Irving is leaning as of right now. What can you tell us?
Well, Sage, there's a couple different options for Kyrie Irving when it comes to his player option. He can opt in and extend for a year or 2 years, or come to an agreement with the Nets. He could also opt out and, of course, become a free agent, but also turn that $36 million option into a new deal that could start at as much as $42 million with the Nets. And so those are the conversations that'll have to happen. But for Brooklyn right now, I think they're really navigating two fronts. One is trying to stay disciplined in their mind on a Kyrie Irving extension. This is a player who has not been as available to them as they've wanted the last couple years. Clearly, Brooklyn has been hesitant to do a long-term deal with Irving, but they also run the risk of alienating Kevin Durant and perhaps unfastening him from his commitment to wanting to be in Brooklyn if Kyrie Irving were to leave. Now, Durant is just starting a new 4-year extension, so he's tied contractually to Brooklyn. In a perfect world, the Nets find a way to do a deal that still gives them some leverage to get Kyrie Irving on the court next season. But certainly, if he's willing to take significantly less money, he could walk. He could sign perhaps that $6 million exemption with the Lakers. Now, that would be a $30 million pay cut. He obviously last year lost about $17 million by staying unvaccinated and out of the Nets lineup.
So much at play with this decision, and if Kyrie does decide to leave, it'll be his 4th team in the last 5 years, which is hard to believe. Woj, sit tight. More with you in a second. Brian?
Okay, Sage, let's keep the Kyrie conversation going. Our NBA analyst, JJ Redick, is with us now. Okay, JJ, so if Irving opts into the deal for next season, and outside of health, availability, which is always big with him, number one thing he should focus on if he's going to help lead those Nets to a deep postseason run next season?
It really comes down to just a commitment to the defensive end. The Brooklyn Nets were 20th in the NBA last year in defensive rating. They were even worse when Kyrie Irving was on the floor. And because the Brooklyn Nets don't have a lot of big wings on the perimeter, their smaller guards like Kyrie, Patty Mills, Seth Curry, they have got to be really, really good at the point of attack. And that's where I think this team can make a big improvement. If they do improve on the defensive end and they're all healthy and Kyrie Irving plays 65, 70 games, this is certainly a contender in the Eastern Conference.
Okay, JJ, thank you very much. Sit tight, though, because we're going to get your thoughts on another player with that player option decision in just a moment. Sage?